there are 3 candidates this evening. Hopefully you will be able to stay with us throughout the evening. The first presenter that we have is Yodit Mesfin Johnson. And Ms. Johnson's career has spanned private, entrepreneurial, and nonprofit service in Washtenaw County and Metro Detroit. Ms. Johnson currently holds the position of Vice President of Strategy at Nonprofit Enterprise at Work, the New Center. And Ms. Johnson has contributed to her community by developing Black Men Read, a pro-literacy storytelling program, and is currently the co-chair of the United Way Equity Committee. So if you'll help me welcome Yodit up here.
I'm going to try to project, if that's okay, so I don't have to do slides, mic, and my notes. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good to see you all. Some familiar faces. I do work at the News Center, and I'm very proud to also serve as the News Center Chief Operating Officer. Really excited that in May I will become the first Black woman to chair the United Way for Washtenaw County. I think it's a good time in our community, you all, and I am so excited to see you and really excited about what as a community we have before us in the way of advancing justice, racial justice. Can you hear me okay? Here we go. So those of you who know me, I am also a diversity and social justice coach, and so I am going to start this evening the same way that I would if you were an audience of my clients, and that is to acknowledge the indigenous land that we are on, the land of Native folks who occupied this space, who continue to occupy this space. It is also Black History Month, the last week of Black History Month, and I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge the elders and ancestors whose shoulders I stand upon and who toiled in this work before equity was even a word, before we were thinking about it. I'm also thinking about, I just learned of Maddie Dorsey, an organizer, entrepreneur, activist, who really worked in Ypsilanti, on the south side in particular, to combat urban renewal. And I thank Miss Maddie for the footprints she left in the sand for folk like me to walk in. And then finally, there are countless folks who worked towards justice in this community. This past week, I met someone who had been doing this work before I was born. Some of those folks are in this room now. I see Mother Richardson and others who have been pursuing justice in this community for as long as we can remember. So I want to acknowledge them. I also want to acknowledge Commissioner Felicia Brayback and the county's current racial equity analyst, Anna Lemler, who, when this was not sexy, were working hard to bring about what later would be our racial equity policy. So I salute you both. I wanted to give you a bit more of a window into me beyond just my resume. I'm very proud of my baby, who I will say is our baby, Tyson, who's pictured here, and 2 bonus daughters, Charisma and Christine. I'm also proud of 20 years of personal and professional commitment to social justice. Before it was my work, it was my personal pursuit. I'm the daughter of activists, my father an immigrant from Ethiopia, and my mother a teacher who worked at EMU until her unfortunate early onset of Alzheimer's and subsequent passing. The program that I founded is called Black Men Read. My son, in his entire scholastic career here in Washtenaw County, has never had a Black male teacher or a Black man in leadership in his school. And so I started Black Men Read as a stopgap, myself and several other parents in the community, as an homage to our children that they deserve to hear and see curriculum that reflects them, and that we have to dispel the myth that black men are not involved in their families. In fact, per capita, black men are more involved in their families than any other daddies. And so that program is an homage to those men. And then finally, I am super proud that we've been able to shed light on the racial leadership gap here at New, or here in the county, through our work at New. Just this past week, a proposal to support a fellowship that will be devoted to leaders in our county and connecting those leaders was funded. The reason why that work is important, we have 2,341 nonprofits in this community, and fewer than 17 of them are led by a person of color. I contrast that with 60% of the people living in poverty in this county are black or brown. So my fundamental belief is that leadership in our social sector needs to reflect our community. And I'm proud that the leadership program, the Leadership Fellowship, is a step in that direction. And I want to take a moment to recognize how proud I am to have worked for the last decade for New. Our Chief Executive Officer, Michael Tyson, is here this evening. And Greg, I just want you to know, if I do work for you, you got big shoes to fill. Michael, my debt of gratitude to you is boundless and endless. Because of you, I've been able to do what I love and get paid for it. So I was asked to help to cast a vision. And I've been inspired, probably like many of you, by the way and the methodology that Zingerman's goes about developing a vision. And Diane, you could start passing out that vision document. Zingerman's describes a vision as an actual destination, a vivid description of what success looks like. And the reason I put this here is because not only does vision need to be inspiring, but it needs to be strategically sound. And frankly, I wasn't wholly comfortable with being asked to cast a vision without you. So what I'm borrowing on is a vision that myself, Scott Menzel, Chuck Warpahowski, and others who, after Scott and I co-chaired the Equity Committee for United Way and cast this vision, we quickly realized that United Way alone could not meet that vision. That to suggest that by 2030 your zip code would no longer define your quality of life meant that many, many hands would need to be on that vision and on purpose in order for us to realize it. So what I am sharing with you in this next slide, you all, is an amalgamation of that conversation, and then what you have in front of you is a narrative that, if I have sufficient time, I want to share with you. But I think this narrative expands upon the vision. But by 2030, if I am your racial equity officer, my aspiration, my hope would be that a child's zip code here would not determine his or her outcomes. That all children here, regardless of social identity, geography, family makeup, are nurtured and thriving. That we are a loving community and we live into our principles of love, of belonging, of anti-racism and social justice. And that every one of the county's children are our own. And not one of them would fall through the cracks on our watch. We will raise up our children to model these principles as they launch, lead, and change the world. And if we are successful, you all, then we will be a model for other communities. So starting from 2030, what would we need to do then to pursue that vision? Well, in this role, I fundamentally believe that we have to listen to learn. So the first 3 months, I'm going to be listening in meaningful conversations with county staff and the community from multiple sectors. I believe that I need to be advised by our youth. If we're creating a vision that informs their future, then they ought to have voice in it. I also think that we need in the social sector more representation from folks that are outside of public or nonprofit space. spaces. So I intend to set a table where the business community, the public community, the nonprofit sector, education, et cetera, can join us. I also am hearing about folks like Sure Moms and trusted advisors and other communities. Equity cannot be about fixing Ipsy in this county. It has to be about the cities that comprise this county coming together for those young people. We will be judged as adults by what happens for them and with them. And so then I need to understand our strategic plan, our current plan, so that I can help to overlay that in any planning I might do in the equity office. Within 6 months, I really see myself leaning in, and by doing that, I've got to create feedback loops with our executive teams, with the Board of Commissioners, and with our community. They have to have a way to know what we're doing, what we're finding, and what we're learning, and to adapt and iterate on that with me. I've got to understand how our policies and procedures here in the county either support or undermine equity. So I want to spend time understanding at every level what those policies and procedures look like. I've got to gather information to help cast our own vision in the department and to understand how to prioritize our goals, because there are many. And it'd be really easy to get caught up in a lot of busy, right? And a lot of trying to figure out where our lane is. I understand from the GARE work and the work that's already in motion here that there are racial equity plans developed in every department. And so we got to look at those. And I want to understand what our leadership is doing and how I can come alongside and support department chairs and leads in accomplishing their plans. And where there isn't a plan, I want to help them to create it. And then we'll use those plans and our progress on those plans over time to communicate back where we've done well and where we're struggling. And then finally, we gotta look for, I hope that in this role, I will have lots of opportunity to educate, inform, and share what the realities are of race, racism, bias, and exclusion, so that those partners across cities, across the county, across communities really understand where we are and what's going on. And I'm hearing all the time when I present our county equity data, folks that just didn't know. One example of that, if you're Latinx and you live in this community, you're born in this community and you make a left out of St. Joe's, your life expectancy is 17 years less than your white counterpart who turns and goes to Ann Arbor. Why is there a compelling case for equity? Because we have got to change that. So then I was asked to share, so it's 3 months and then 6 months and then we hop to 5 years. So this slide is about what I think and what I would hope to see if we are all rallying around this work. And that is, I would want to see that the majority of 3-year-olds in this county are in preschool. That high school seniors have a plan post-graduation, whether that's trade, entrepreneurship, college, they got a plan. We have to have businesses that reflect the community. So I want to see more diverse businesses in this community that employ residents. We are not going to charity our way to equity. Folks need jobs, they need businesses, and they need equitable economic development. We need more restorative practices in juvenile justice, and I would hope in 5 years that I never hear that an 18-year-old or a child 18 or under is incarcerated. That is a reflection on us, not them. And finally, I'm so tired of affordable housing as an Ipsy conversation. So I would hope that in 5 years, we recognize how important affordable housing in our community is, and throughout our community. And then I would hope for my son and for our children that as a result of our successes that we're able to attract more diverse teachers to this county so our children see folks that look like them in the classroom. And I'm going to move past, here was where I hoped to share the narrative that you have in your hand of the vision. I'm going to hold that so that I can get to the final slide, which I feel is important, and I want to honor the time I have. So here are some things that feel very important for me to consider that are outside of a vision. So one is that culture eats strategy for breakfast, and I am a strategist, I can tell you that. If the culture here or the pond is sick and we keep treating the fish, we're not gonna get to that vision. So we've got to work to shift first our hearts, y'all. You have to see my son as your own. And then we'll shift our head and our hands. So what you need to know about me is I'm gonna focus a lot on our culture at the county. The other thing is high-performing teams are rooted in trust, and I don't have fidelity to the county right now, so I'm gonna be real honest and say we have a trust issue. And I'm going to work to repair that, and I know that Greg and other leadership will. We need both and approaches. If I need to be able to work in the organization and outside of the organization. The community's been waiting on this role for a long time, and they need to know that we're here and present. We need widespread support for this role. I cannot be, I can't shoulder the burden of moving equity along, and so widespread support by our leadership with a deep commitment to the work. Equity is a start, you all, but it is rooted in a deficit mindset. So one of the things that we have to do is to start to see hope and possibility and abundance in this work. And we have to see ourselves, whether you're experiencing the disparate outcomes or you're perpetrating them, you have to see yourself in this work. And we have to reframe the way we think about it. And in shifting culture, y'all, we have to examine the ways that dominant culture pervade our community and oppress all of us. And here's where I want to spend a little time. There's another handout for you. When I say dominant culture characteristics, I'm talking about things like a sense of urgency. I will deliver on my commitments, but I am not going fast. We're going to take our time to think meaningfully about this work together, to get input from folks who may not be accustomed to giving input in the ways that you and I are. We're going to push back on this worship of the written word. I'm not producing a bunch of reports. I'm going to spend time and listen with our community and find meaningful ways to feed information back to you. We have to be willing to have open conflict. Dominant culture often represses conflict. We have to be willing to have conflict, and if we build trust, we can get there. Progress is not bigger or more. Progress is long and deep. And we have to commit to that as well, you all. And this idea of a right to comfort, that equity makes us uncomfortable, and so we have to hurry up and make it not hurt so bad, actually is a Band-Aid on a dam. So being uncomfortable is where growth and change and opportunity exists. So I want to dismantle dominant culture, ideology, and characteristics in the county. And then I want to be a model for that for our partners throughout the county so that they too are reimagining the way they think about power hoarding or paternalism or quantity over quality. And I think that is, in closing, really the audacious goal, that the radical goal that folks like Angela Davis, who came before me, would ask of me, would expect of me. That I would have the audacity to think we could do this, that we could meet a 2030 vision together, that I would come before you as nervous and scared as I am and tell you that my son has to be our son. The children in Ypsilanti have to be our children. The children in Saline, who 1,700 folks said they wouldn't read a book about a transgender kid, they gotta know we're gonna stand in the gap for them. The kids on the northeast side of Ann Arbor, white and wealthy, who are killing themselves in the pressure of dominant culture and white supremacy, they gotta know that we're there for them. Every one of your children needs to know that we're there for them. So I hope that I've at least casted loosely what you can expect of me, and now I think I'm to turn it over for Q&A. Is that right, Diane? All right. Thank you, everyone.
So when you walked in today, there were some note cards over on the side. If you have any specific questions that you would like to ask of the presenter, give you a couple of minutes to jot down things if you do have those. Or does anybody have any right now that we can, if you could send your note cards over to either one side or the other? Anyone? So if you could, Lafise, if you could just pass that down to Nina. Thank you. Just take a couple minutes. If anybody needs a note card to write a question, please raise your hand and we can get some for you. But while those are being collected, the hiring team over here had a couple of questions right off the bat that we could ask you to respond to. We know that we have both support and resistance in our list, and I think you talked a little bit about that. How would you respond to that?
We know that we have support and resistance. I think it's a storytelling issue, not a unwillingness to support. I think that because we have positioned this in a deficit frame, that people think, and equity does this. Let me tell you what, equity suggests I gotta give something up for somebody else to get something. And you could be a saint in this room, but depending on what that something is, it's unlikely you're gonna come up off of it, right, if it matters enough to you. So I think one of the reasons why I'm encouraging us to move to, this is all of us, like equity benefits everyone. If you think about the number one line item, the number one expense on our state budget is incarcerating people. Now, if you tell me that conservatives don't want to see that number lowered, you're wrong. They do. We do. So I think it's how we have framed this work. It's how we've thought about it. So our job is to see the value in and the return on investment, if you will, in such a capitalistic frame, but the return on the investment for committing to access, education, opportunity, healthcare. We have just been conditioned in this culture to operate in this deficit. So what I'd like to see us do is to change the narrative. I have not found yet much resistance, frankly, when you can get to the heart of a person around why this work matters. I've not found one, I might maybe live in a bubble, but I haven't found one person that if you say, will you come alongside me to help support our children, that said, no, I'm not interested, right? But when you say, will you give up your, whatever, so Ipsy kids can get, well then, yeah, that's a problem. So, does that help?
Thank you.
What else we got?
One other question that we have right now is this work, as you well know, requires someone who is resilient and can persevere. How do you sustain yourself in the work?
Black woman. That's what we do. I got no other choice. That's what we do. No, I'm living in my truth, y'all. I mean, I'm doing what I was purposed to do. That's how you get to resilience. I have no other choice. My son is expecting this. I have no other choice but then to throw myself in the work. And it's rewarding every day. As hard as it is, it's rewarding every day.
Okay, now we can, Anna, a couple of questions. So here's a question from someone in the audience. Please describe how you would engage and build partnerships with citizens and organizations within the county.
Oh, you don't know me. I already do that. That's what I think my superpower, frankly, is connections, meaningful connections. So an example of that is we worked recently in order to develop this Leaders of Color Fellowship. Mind you, we were able to bring the philanthropic community, the business community. More than 50 leaders in this community met with us on 3 separate occasions and really endorsed at every step of the way. So what you gotta know is, if I get this job, I'm not moving without my community's endorsement. And by community, I mean our community. 2 weeks ago, 15 people of color were in my living room talking about how we develop a freedom school for kids of color, because our children are languishing in public schools in this community. Developing our equity commitment, equity statement, equity commitment at United Way was a yeoman's feat to get multiple stakeholders at every level involved. It's the space I'm most comfortable in. I think I also have a healthy dose of insecurity, so I like to check in, like, did I get that right? I think I got that right. I'm a PTO mama, and y'all gotta know that PTO requires lots of collaboration. Did I answer that?
Yes, absolutely, thank you. So part of your last answer probably dealt with some of this, but can you share ideas or methods that we can use to get input from people who typically are not heard from or considered in decision making?
Connecting with people is about relationships. You can't wait till you got a proposal to put forth to engage the community. And we do that too often. They're an afterthought. Deep relationships and meaningful relationships. I spent Friday evening in Park Ridge at their Black History Month. I didn't see a lot of y'all there. Like, people, you gotta show up. I think incentives are good as well. If you're gonna ask people to be a part of your focus group, pay them, right? Folks gotta take time off of work or step away from their obligations for family. The way in which we connect with the people who are not typically engaged is we do it. We take the time. That's why I said we gotta slow the bus down, right? Because so often we're trying to produce the result and we rush. You gotta slow down, develop relationships, and listen. And then once you listen, you gotta be willing to change your mindset. You can't ask people to give you feedback and then not use it. So that's the reason we have to look at our culture, because the way we think about things is off. So we gotta be willing to listen to the community when they tell us what they need. And I think the trusted advisors over in Sycamore Meadows is a great example of that. If you resource them and let them tell you what they need, they can make a way for themselves. So I'm not here to solve problems for a community. I'm here to resource opportunities for them to solve their own problems.
Thank you. There are a lot of folks that have the entitlement attitude. How can that be changed to an equity attitude?
I don't understand that question. Would you tell me what that means, if you're willing to?
I can tell you what it means. It means that there are some people who believe that they can do it, and why the other person has to ask, explain, and still possibly be told no. So I'm just talking in general, equity, why the next person standing here, they already know they can have what they asked for or can do what they want to do, while the person over here has to explain and still may not possibly get it.
Gotcha. I think I understand. I'm going to check with you, okay?
Okay.
What I'm hearing is privilege, right? Like some
Yes.
people have privilege and some folks don't, and how do we attend to that?
Correct.
And I'm going to point back to, and I think you all have the handout that explains some of this a little bit more, right? So this is, for me, it's about changing the culture, and it's about thinking about things like how our policies and procedures reinforce folks being able to have an equitable opportunity to thrive, right? So let's use an example of human resources. One of the things we know is that if you put more than 8 bullet items on a job description, women and people of color will opt out. They just won't even apply. Because they don't, and if you have 8 and they don't think they meet 80% of the qualifications, then they'll opt out as well. So by shifting the ways in which we create opportunity, for example, reducing the number of bullet items on a job description, being explicit about who we want to apply for the job and who should comprise our teams, we have an opportunity to not have it be such an unequal footing when we start. Does that make sense? By taking the box of whether or not you had a felony off of the front of an application, we move past some of that, Am I getting that?
Yes and
that right?
no.
Okay. I'll take one more quick round at it then. Tell me, can you be more explicit for me?
Without being, saying that's, well, let's see. Let's say I wanted to, just saying, let's say I wanted to stay home. Let's say we had bad weather.
Mm-hmm.
And it was really bad. And I say, oh, I'm not coming into work
Mm-hmm.
because of the weather. Really bad. And I say, the next person says, oh, I'm going to work from home in the same department. And the person who says they're going to take off doesn't even get that option.
Gotcha.
And then when they speak about it, we're saying, let's say,
Sure.
they're like,
Say really kind.
the person says, you can't work from home.
Yeah. So you know what I'm gonna say to that, and then if I get this job, you come talk to me. Okay. Here's what I want to say is that's about values. Okay. That is not about a policy or a procedure. Values govern how we do things around here, and behind your head, our guiding principles include providing necessary knowledge and resources to county employees, ensuring adequate provision of service, focusing on root cause problems. So we can't just put them on a sign in the back of the building, in the back of the room. We have to, as leaders, we have to model it. We have to hold our staff accountable. We have to measure and talk about the ways in which we're living out of our values. And so what I'm hearing is a values misalignment. Your interpretation, whether it's right or wrong, and whether this situation is hypothetical or not, when my team is focused on the problem, I have not gotten clear with them about what matters, and more importantly, what values, how we do things around here. Okay?
Thank you.
So,
ask the rest of these people all these questions.
so this one is about accountability.
Okay.
And not just accountability for county administrators, politicians, but also accountability to the community. How would you ensure that all areas are held accountable or a part of that?
Okay. The county is a public servant, so our accountability is first and foremost to the public we serve, to the community. The ways in which I've been able to be successful around accountability is through transparency. I tell people what I'm gonna do, I do what I say I'm gonna do, and if I'm gonna fall short of it, I let them know. And I think that's a reasonable request of my office, of our community leadership, and it can't be that you only challenge accountability when it's the thing you care about. We have to create as a value accountability, which what accountability looks like in practice, you all, is I trust you. I believe you. I'm gonna do what I tell you. Can trust me. I'm gonna do what matters to you matters to me. And whether I get this job or not, you all, each of us, many of you are leading in this community. Our community has gotta know you trust them, they matter, and we're gonna do what we said we were gonna do. And that when we can't, we're gonna fail publicly.
The next question specifically is more specific to law enforcement. And how will you address targeting issues with law enforcement towards the eastern side of the county?
By the time the police show up, it's too late, y'all. That's a downstream response. So we've got to do the upstream work that keeps police doing solely what they're tasked with doing, and that is protecting and serving this community, and not necessarily targeting, I think was the word she used, or policing our children. I know for sure that if somebody broke in my house, I'm gonna pick up the phone and call the police, and you are too. We need them, and we need to be in relationship with them. But they are responding now to the work we have not done. That's it. And then they are easy targets. Now, do they have their issues? Absolutely. They have their issues. But you can't unconscious bias the police department to not criminalizing our children. Those babies that they're dealing with, and I say babies because many of them are young adults that are in police custody, those children were criminalized in kindergarten. Teachers that we support, we're sending them to the detention hall and telling them they didn't matter in the first grade. So I'm not going to be that person that's going to attack our police department. I'm going to hold them accountable. I told you I don't want any babies in lockup. We got to figure out a way to get men and women who are in county jail behind a $200 bond out. We got to get mamas and families reunited. Those are all things we have to do. But if we set this up where there's where we villainize our police force, then it will perpetuate the problem. So I'm suggesting we look upstream.
Thank you. So how do we stop tokenism?
I've officially been stumped. That's a relationship thing too. So what we know is that the majority of our social networks are largely homogenous. All you need to do is look at a Sunday morning where we worship. Look at your neighborhood. Look at who you break bread with, who's at your dinner table. And that's all of us. Who what political affiliation your friends have, what class they have, what race, what ethnicity, what sexual orientation. Our social networks are largely homogenous. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but what happens is you get somebody like me, and I always joke, so I'm gonna let y'all in on a little inside joke. I like a unicorn. People are like, damn, she's smart, black, a woman, she can, she's fun, and you want to be on our committee? No. You want to be on our board? No. By the way, they have it in the Bible. So where we have moved, where I have found meaningful relationship is at my dinner table, is in deep and abiding and real relationship, right relationship with folks. It's sitting around a table talking about these difficult things. I'm looking at Charmin Spicer, me, her, Lori Saginaw, traipse off to Detroit to the Race Forward conference, and not at the conference, but after the conference, fellowship together, get to know each other. So when I call Charmin and say, hey, Melvin Parson is putting this harvest festival on and we need your gifts, she shows up. I didn't see a lot of y'all. Thank you for that, by the way, Charmin. It's right relationship. That's how we move away from tokenism. And stop gazing at cultures and gazing at difference. Celebrating difference means there ought to be lots of difference. Not one person of color, not one person who identifies in the LGBTQI community, not one person who is poor or what, but multiple people who are different from us. And it's not, if you've read Scott Page's work at U of M, difference and diversity actually impact our bottom line too. It spurs innovation. It's not just a moral imperative. But that's often how we're attacking it, how we're thinking about it. Oh, we look around the table, we don't know black people. Anybody know some black folks? Right? So this is an opportunity for us. And the short answer to how do we deal with tokenism is we don't do it.
Okay, I promise this is the last one. Because we only have a few more minutes. Okay. So how would you see the county pushing or leading the affordable housing issue in areas beyond Ypsilanti?
Oh, bless our friends in Ann Arbor. Felicia at least knows that the rare county meeting that I showed up at, and I promise I will come to more of them, but the rare one that I showed up at was about affordable housing. And I want to tell you that I'm pretty sure someone in comments used the word affordables, like a noun. And that was jarring. But then also affordable housing now is a code word. So just so you know, those of us who are coded in that language know it. And we're watching you. So the way that we deal with affordable housing, like a lot of this, you all, I had this conversation as I was preparing for the interview. My friend was like, you talk a lot about culture and you talk a lot about, and the squishier stuff, vision and values, right? But that's because this is a decision. That's all it is. It's not some over-intellectualized, academic approach to community building. It's simple. You want black folks in your neighborhood? You want immigrants in your neighborhood? Or you don't. So the decision is ours. Now, all of us understand the coded language of developing housing in Ipsy. We want the deplorables in Ipsy. We don't mind having y'all around, but we don't want you in our neighborhood. And if that is not what we intend, then that is certainly the message that's being conveyed. And when I talk about a vision of belonging, does that feel like you belong?
Well, they're separated.
What's that?
Separation.
Yeah, so we've got to come reckon with these realities. All of us. We've got to rethink the way we think about community and who gets to participate and who doesn't. And the thing about living in an affluent, mostly white, and only 12% of the population in Washtenaw County is black. Only 4% is Asian. Only 3%, fewer than 1% is Native American. So it's real easy to be invisible in this county. Real easy. And it's real easy to dismiss the issues of equity to across 23. Let them deal with it. So what I want to say is affordable housing is a right. Housing is a human right. It's not some privilege you affording folks. And if we want to solve issues, you understand that the reason why people stay poor is not because they don't want to work. It's because they're surrounded by other poor people. Who helped you get your job? Who helped you in your network? Who helped you rise out of your circumstance? It was people who were a little bit farther along than you, right? But when you have concentrated poverty in one area, how can we transform that? That's the case for affordable housing, y'all. You want to solve poverty? Talk about that. Name it. You don't want folks of color in your backyard, period.
One of the things that I heard one time with people talking about affordable housing, like the public library space, they were saying that they were put the buzzword in there, this is going to have some affordable housing. Well, the affordable housing started so high, people who needed affordable housing was just like, where did this number come from? But to the people putting it in there, they thought that was cheap. Someone that doesn't have money like that, that's
Right.
not affordable housing. So the definition of some of these buzzwords and how people are using it seems to be good.
Thank you for that. We're the third wealthiest county in this state, and no reason why folks should be, why 40% of the people who live in this county, 25% of them are check to check, and another 14% of them are at or below the federal poverty level. Again, that's on our watch. This is not an issue of money or whether or not there's enough land to build. This is a decision. It's a conscious decision, and it's one we will have to reckon with. Do we have to end on that? Should we sing National Black Anthem or something? Is every voice that everybody.
Did we get the other document that she had about the vision?
I think they're over on the side. We were heading to make some, we have just a terrific turnout, so we had to make some additional copies for you all. So we're going to take a 15-minute break. There are forms that, hopefully you picked one up there when you walked in. Feedback forms, anything additional that you wish to share with the hiring team or for them to take into consideration. Those forms are done anonymously, and you will see, Anna, I believe there's like a green box that's over on the side. And then for those of you that are standing in the back, there are some seats in the front. I know it's more popular to be in the back, but there are some other seats up here. So thank you.